They fired her for taking her long-awaited vacation. But they forgot the clause she never did. This is the story of Grace, a woman who turned quiet resistance into poetic justice. Watch till the end. Her calm, "Thank you," changed everything. I'd been at Harrison and Cole Financial for 7 years when I sent the email that would change everything. It was a quiet Friday afternoon. My desk overlooked Madison Avenue, the golden light of late summer spilling between the skyscrapers. I had just wrapped a month-end report that should have been handled by 3 people, but we were always cutting costs. I was running on caffeine and patience, so I opened my inbox, took a deep breath, and typed what I'd been thinking about for months. Hi, HR. As discussed during my last review, I'll be taking my scheduled 2-week vacation starting next month. Please confirm receipt. Best, Grace. It was polite, professional, deserved. I delayed this vacation twice already. Once because our CEO wanted the Q4 presentation redone with more flair, and once because my team lead went on maternity leave, leaving me to pick up her projects. But this time I wasn't backing down. My mother's 60th birthday was coming up in Maine, and I promised her we'd spend a week by the ocean. No late-night calls, no spreadsheets, no urgent Slack messages. When I hit send, I smiled. It felt small, but it was a boundary one I'd earned. The response came faster than I expected. HR, Clara, Grace. Thanks for confirming. The CEO has asked that all senior staff remain available during that period. Please postpone your vacation until further notice. I stared at the screen. It was almost comical, a company that called us family, yet couldn't function if one family member took a break. I typed back carefully. Hi, Clara. Unfortunately, I've already made non-refundable plans. I'll be away and offline during those 2 weeks. Then, I silenced my notifications. By the end of the day, the whispers had started. Did you hear Grace refuse to reschedule? She actually said no to the CEO? Apparently, boundaries were rebellious acts in corporate America. That weekend, I tried not to think about it. I took long walks through Central Park, drank wine with my neighbor, and laughed about how they'd survive. But when Monday arrived, there was a different energy at the office. Clara avoided eye contact. My access to certain folders had been revoked for security reasons. My direct reports were suddenly reassigned. And then, around 4 p.m., I got the email that ended everything. Grace. Effective immediately, your position at Harrison and Cole Financial has been terminated. Due to policy violations, your severance package has been revoked. HR will arrange the return of company property by end of day. Regards, Clara. I reread it 3 times. My first instinct was disbelief, then anger, then calm, because I knew something they didn't. So I typed my reply. Thank you for the update. That was all. No begging. No emotion. Just grace, literally. They thought they'd humiliated me. But as I watched the city lights flicker on that night, I smiled to myself. Because 7 years earlier, when I signed that contract, I'd spent 3 hours reading every clause, every word. And one particular section, buried deep on page 18, was about to turn the tables completely. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was sad, but because I was awake with purpose. For years, I drafted contracts for executives, audited internal documents, and watched as the company's leaders signed agreements they didn't bother to read. Harrison and Cole was ruthless with outsiders, but sloppy when it came to their own compliance. I used to joke that if the devil ever sued them, he'd win on technicalities alone. And now I was about to become that technicality. The clause that had caught my attention years ago was titled Mutual Separation and Discretionary Rights. It was designed to protect senior employees during restructuring or termination under dispute. Most people skimmed it, buried between pages of legal jargon. But I'd read it word for word. I remembered sitting in that cold HR office 7 years earlier, while Clara slid the papers toward me. She was still young then, nervous, trying to appear confident in her blazer that was one size too big. "Just standard policy," she'd said. It wasn't. The clause stated that if my termination occurred without documented misconduct or without prior written warning, my full severance, plus a year of retained benefits, would be automatically activated upon processing my exit. Not subject to approval. Not pending HR review. Automatically activated. But it got better. There was a subsection, added after a legal dispute in 2013, requiring the company's legal department to review any severance denial within 24 hours and report it directly to the board for compliance. In short, HR couldn't just revoke my severance. Doing so triggered an automatic audit from the company's lawyers. And that audit would expose far more than they realized. The next morning, I dressed like I always did, neatly, confidently, deliberately. A white blouse, black trousers, low heels. The uniform of someone who never begged. I walked into the office at 9 a.m. sharp, not because I had to, but because I wanted them to see me one last time. I returned my laptop, keycard, and ID badge to the HR desk. Clara's smile was stiff, mechanical. "Grace, we'll send your final paycheck by next Friday," she said, avoiding eye contact. "You're not eligible for severance due to refusal to comply with company directives." I tilted my head. "Oh, that's interesting," I said lightly. "Could you please make sure legal gets a copy of my termination paperwork within the next 24 hours? I'd just like to make sure they're in the loop, standard protocol." Her face froze. "Legal?" "Yes," I said with a faint smile. "Page 18, Section 12. It's in my contract. I assume you've read it?" For the first time, she blinked, uncertain. "I'll check with legal," she murmured. "Please do," I said. "They'll want to make sure this was all done by the book." Then I turned, walked past the glass offices, and pressed the elevator button. The door slid shut on a dozen staring faces, some pitying, some curious. None of them knew what was coming. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Daniel, the head of the company's legal team. "Grace," he began carefully, "we're reviewing your termination documentation. There seems to be a discrepancy." I kept my tone pleasant. "Oh, what kind of discrepancy?" "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "according to your contract, your severance and benefits shouldn't have been revoked without proper cause. There's no record of misconduct. I'll be raising this at tomorrow's board meeting." I smiled. "Thank you for the update," I said, repeating their own cold line back to him. He chuckled softly, almost impressed. "You always did your homework." "I just read what others ignored," I said. "Good night, Daniel." When I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine, stood by the window, and looked down at the city glowing below. They thought firing me would make me disappear quietly. Instead, I'd become the storm they'd called down on themselves. Tomorrow, that storm would hit the boardroom. The next morning, I woke up early, not out of habit, but anticipation. My inbox was already buzzing. Word traveled fast in corporate circles, and nothing spread quicker than the scent of a legal misstep. I made myself coffee, sat by the window, and watched New York stretch awake. The city was merciless, but it always rewarded those who knew when to wait, when to strike, and when to stay silent. I didn't need to show up at the office anymore. My work was already being done for me by the company's own legal team. At 9:45 a.m., the board gathered on the 34th floor of the Harrison and Cole Tower. Daniel, the head of legal, stood at one end of the long glass table, holding a printed copy of my contract. His tone, calm but clipped, filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I've reviewed the termination documents for Grace Porter. There are serious inconsistencies." The CEO, Richard Hale, leaned back in his chair with his usual smirk. I could almost picture it from my apartment across the river. That quiet arrogance that made people hesitate before challenging him. "Daniel," Richard said, "we terminated her for insubordination. She refused a directive." "Actually, Daniel replied evenly. There was no written warning or prior disciplinary note in her file. That's a breach of Clause 12.4 in her employment agreement. He flipped a page. And under Clause 12.5, any revocation of severance without due cause requires immediate board notification, something HR failed to do. Clara, sitting near the corner, went pale. She'd been called in for transparency. Her hands fidgeted under the table. Richard sighed. So, what are we saying here? We pay her severance and move on. Daniel's jaw tightened. It's not that simple. Clause 12.7 includes a penalty for wrongful termination. It's equivalent to 12 months of base salary plus legal fees. And, since the breach originated from HR under executive directive, liability extends to the approving officer. The room fell silent. Then, somewhere down the table, a director whispered, "That's you, Richard." He froze mid-sip, his coffee cup suspended for half a second before slipping from his hand. It shattered against the conference table, spraying dark stains across polished glass. The silence that followed was absolute. The HR director cleared her throat. Could we perhaps settle this quietly? Daniel shook his head. The clause is automatic. It's already been logged in the system. Once Grace's termination was processed without proper cause, her severance and compensation triggered. The system flagged it overnight. Compliance saw it before I did. You mean this is already visible to the board auditors? One of the senior partners asked. Yes, Daniel said. And the Department of Labor could view it if they audit next quarter. It's a serious violation. Clara whispered. Oh my God. Richard stood up, trying to salvage authority. All right. Everyone calm down. We'll handle it. She was a good employee. I'll make a call. Maybe we. Daniel cut him off, his tone sharper now. It's out of your hands. Grace's contract was airtight. You signed off on it yourself, remember? 7 years ago. After we lost that gender discrimination case, remember why those protections were added? A few heads turned toward him. Others looked away. Because they all remembered. That case had cost the firm nearly $2 million, and the woman behind it had vanished quietly with a settlement. They'd sworn it wouldn't happen again. But here I was, the ghost of their oversight, come back in a silk blouse and calm voice. That afternoon, while panic swirled through the boardroom, I took a walk through Central Park. The sky was a soft autumn blue, the air cool enough to sting. I let my phone buzz in my bag. Emails from former colleagues, a missed call from an unknown number. By the time I checked my messages, I had 3 from Daniel. Grace, we're arranging your payout immediately. Please confirm your preferred account details for wire transfer. Also, the board has asked for a confidentiality agreement. They're requesting to discuss terms. I smiled to myself. They wanted silence. They'd get quiet, but not the kind they could control. Because what they didn't realize was that I'd already been documenting everything, the emails, the termination letter, the time-stamped call logs. I wasn't going to post it online or sue them publicly. No, I preferred something cleaner. I wanted them to know they'd been outsmarted by the woman they thought they could discard. As the sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline, I whispered to myself, this isn't revenge, it's balance. And balance, I'd learned, always returns. 2 days after the boardroom meltdown, I received a formal letter by courier. No email this time, they wanted paper. Something that felt official, something they hoped would make me feel small again. The letterhead gleamed with a Harrison and Cole crest, the same one that used to fill me with pride. I slit the envelope open slowly, feeling the weight of the moment, the irony of it all. They fired me to silence me. Now they were begging me to keep quiet. Dear Ms. Porter, following recent events, the board of directors at Harrison and Cole Financial would like to extend an amended separation agreement for your review. In addition to your original severance entitlements, the board is offering an additional settlement of $250,000 as a discretionary goodwill payment. In exchange, We respectfully request that you sign the attached non-disclosure agreement, NDA, and non-disparagement clause pertaining to all internal communications and business practices. We trust this matter can be resolved amicably. Sincerely, Daniel Ward, Head of Legal Affairs. Amicably. They loved that word, as if money could sanitize humiliation. I sat at my kitchen table, rereading the letter while the city hummed below my window. Somewhere down there, men in suits were probably congratulating themselves for handling the situation. I wasn't angry. I was stoic. They still thought I'd take the bait, grab the money, and fade into silence. But what they didn't understand was that this wasn't about dollars. It was about dignity. The same company that called me family had publicly erased me for wanting 2 weeks of rest. They'd taken my loyalty, my time, and my peace of mind. Now they wanted to buy my silence. No. They didn't deserve quiet. They deserved clarity. That evening, I drafted my reply. It wasn't long, just a few lines. To Daniel Ward. Subject: Settlement Agreement. Hi Daniel. Thank you for the offer. Please note that I will not be signing the NDA at this time. I'm sure the board understands that I intend to retain full transparency regarding my experience at Harrison and Cole, including the manner of my termination. I trust this won't be an issue, since compliance values honesty above all else. Best regards, Grace Porter. I hovered over send for a moment, then clicked. It felt like pressing a detonator made of truth. Within an hour, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Grace, he said, sounding half admiring, half exasperated. Do you have any idea what kind of storm this will cause? Yes, I said calmly. And you should too. You've seen the clause. You know what happens when a terminated employee refuses to sign an NDA. He hesitated. You're referring to the compliance clause? Section 15.2, I said smoothly. The one that states any employee who rejects an NDA after wrongful termination must be offered public arbitration within 30 days. It's designed to protect transparency. He exhaled. You really did read every line. Of course I did, I said. It's my name on the paper. That night, panic started rippling through the company again. I didn't have to lift a finger. Every partner, every investor, every compliance officer would now receive notice that Grace Porter's termination was under arbitration. And the best part? Arbitration records weren't sealed. They were public. The company had built that policy years ago to seem ethically progressive. Now it was going to be their undoing. The following morning, I woke up to a city buzzing with new energy. Emails flooded my inbox. Colleagues, ex-employees, even strangers from LinkedIn. Grace, is it true you stood up to Harrison and Cole? We've all wanted to say something for years. You're a legend. I smiled, sipping my coffee slowly. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes, it looks like a calm woman in her apartment, holding a letter that once tried to buy her silence, and realizing she no longer needs their approval to have power. By noon, Daniel called again. Grace, he said softly, the board is nervous. They're willing to negotiate a different kind of agreement. Would you be open to discussing your terms? I laughed, quietly, but long enough for him to hear it. My terms, I repeated. Oh, Daniel, I already have everything I want, but sure, let's talk. When I met Daniel again, the city was wrapped in late autumn light. We agreed to meet not in the company's marble tower, but in a quiet cafe in Soho, my choice. I arrived early. The place smelled of roasted coffee beans and rain. Through the window, I could see reflections of people rushing home, umbrellas in hand, unaware that somewhere between the steam and the glass, a reckoning was being brewed. Daniel walked in 10 minutes late, looking tired, almost apologetic. His suit was crisp as always, but there was something softer about him now, a man aware he was delivering peace offerings to the very person they'd underestimated. He ordered black coffee and leaned forward. Grace, he said, voice low, the board asked me to negotiate directly with you. They want closure, and they're willing to listen to your conditions. I smiled faintly. My conditions? He nodded. Within reason. I set my cup down gently. Daniel, I said, you and I both know reason is a matter of perspective. For a moment, we just looked at each other, lawyer and analyst, both fluent in the language of quiet warfare. Then I opened my notebook. I'd written my terms the night before. Not in rage, not in haste, but with precision. The kind of calm only betrayal can teach. I slid the paper across the table. It had 3 lines. 1. Reinstate all severance and benefits per contract. 2. Issue a formal apology, written, not verbal, acknowledging wrongful termination. 3. Establish a new internal policy ensuring every employee is guaranteed 2 consecutive weeks of uninterrupted paid leave per year, without exception. Daniel read it twice. That's it, he asked, astonished. That's it, I said softly. No headlines. No lawsuits. No money beyond what's owed. He looked at me, searching for a hidden motive. You don't want to hurt them. No, I said, meeting his gaze. I just want them to remember that dignity doesn't come with a paycheck. He sat back, rubbing his chin. You're aware the board won't like issuing a written apology. It sets precedent. I smiled. That's the point. Daniel chuckled under his breath. You've always been one step ahead. I shrugged lightly. That's what happens when you stop confusing loyalty with silence. He promised to bring my terms to the board that afternoon. 3 days later, my phone buzzed again, a new email from Daniel. Subject: Board response. Grace, the board has reviewed your conditions. They have agreed to reinstate your severance in full and approve the proposed leave policy. Regarding the written apology, they are divided. I believe a personal note from the CEO would suffice. Shall we consider that acceptable? Daniel. I read it slowly, feeling that familiar spark of satisfaction. They'd accepted the impossible. But I wasn't after his words. I was after his understanding. I wanted Richard Hale, the man who'd fired me with a click of an email, to taste humility. So I replied, simple as ever. A personal note will do. I trust he'll choose his words carefully. That evening, I went for a long walk through Brooklyn Bridge Park. The wind off the East River was cold, but it felt clean, like something being washed away. As I watched the skyline shimmer in the distance, my phone pinged. One new message. I opened it. From Richard Hale. Subject: Apology. Grace, I want to personally acknowledge the manner of your termination was both unfair and inconsistent with company policy. Your professionalism, even in the face of this, speaks volumes about your character. We are reviewing internal practices to ensure this never happens again. Richard Hale, CEO. I read it twice. Not because I needed to, but because it was surreal. The same man who once dismissed me with 2 sentences now struggled to string together humility. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. Justice, when quiet, sounds a lot like stillness. The next day, the company made an internal announcement. Effective immediately, all employees will receive a guaranteed 2-week uninterrupted paid leave each year. No one knew it was because of me. No press release. No spotlight. Just change, silent, clean, complete. I sat by my window that night, watching snow begin to fall over the city. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer needed their validation to feel valuable. When my mother called that night, her voice was warm with concern. So, did they make it right? I smiled, looking out at the lights across the Hudson. Yes, Mom, they did. What are you going to do now? I thought for a moment. Rest, I said. Then maybe help other women read the fine print. For weeks after the apology, my days felt still. Not the heavy kind of stillness that comes from sadness, but the kind that comes right after a storm has passed. You know the feeling when everything that once felt loud finally goes quiet and you can finally hear yourself again. I spent mornings making coffee in my favorite chipped mug, watching snow gather on the fire escape. For the first time in years, my inbox wasn't a battlefield. No late-night, urgent requests. No blinking red messages. Just peace. But peace, as I learned, doesn't stay still for long. Because when truth moves, even quietly, it echoes. 2 weeks after my settlement was finalized, a message appeared in my LinkedIn inbox. It was from a woman I'd trained years ago, Lydia, who had left the company long before the chaos. Grace, I heard what happened. I don't know the details, but I want you to know, people are talking. Not in whispers. In admiration. You did something we all wanted to do. I stared at her message for a moment, smiling. I hadn't told anyone the specifics of what happened. No press, no posts, no interviews. I didn't need to. The truth had its own wings. It traveled through hallways, lunchrooms, late-night calls, and quiet gossip between coworkers. They didn't know every clause or every word I used. They just knew I'd stood up. And somehow that was enough. A week later, another message came, this time from a stranger. Hi, Grace. I work at an advertising firm uptown. Our HR used to deny everyone their leave for company needs. But last week, management suddenly announced a new policy. 2-week mandatory annual leave. No exceptions. I heard your name mentioned in the meeting. Just wanted to say thank you. I sat back, heart thudding softly. It was spreading. What had started as one act of defiance, one calm refusal to apologize for being human, had rippled across an entire city of exhausted women. And maybe men too. People who'd been told they owed their souls to their paychecks. People who'd forgotten they had power. Soon, I started getting invitations, quiet ones. Emails from women in finance, healthcare, tech. All saying the same thing. We're starting a group to educate women about their contracts. Would you speak to us about reading the fine print? You don't have to say much, Grace. Just tell your story. The old me, the one who'd spent years buried in spreadsheets and silence, might have declined. But this Grace? She knew better. So I said yes. Our first meeting was held in a library basement in Midtown. 12 women showed up that night. Some were fresh graduates. Others were single mothers, middle-aged, tired but resilient. We sat in a circle of metal chairs under fluorescent lights, sipping lukewarm tea and sharing stories that all sounded too similar. One woman said, "My boss told me I wasn't a team player for asking to take my child to a doctor's appointment." Another whispered, "I signed my contract without reading it. I didn't even know I was entitled to paid leave." I listened. I didn't preach. I just told them my story, not the legal details, but the human ones. How they fired me for wanting time to breathe. How I stayed calm when anger could have devoured me. And how quiet resistance can be the loudest form of revenge. When the meeting ended, one of the women hugged me. Her voice trembled as she said, "You made me believe we can fight without shouting." That line stayed with me for days. Because that's exactly what I'd learned. Sometimes power doesn't roar, it whispers. And sometimes the whisper spreads farther than a scream ever could. By the end of the month, our small circle grew into a movement. We called it the fine print. It wasn't a company or a campaign, it was a community. A gathering of women who were tired of being compliant instead of confident. We taught each other how to understand contracts, how to spot manipulation, how to say no without apology. And slowly, change began to trickle upward. Somewhere in those boardrooms that once dismissed women like me, policies were rewritten. Some CEOs started listening before threatening. Some HR teams learned that vacation wasn't a privilege, it was a right. But not everyone was happy about it. A few months later, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. "You've made powerful enemies, Grace. Some of us think you should have stayed quiet." I read it once, then deleted it. I wasn't afraid. because the woman who once flinched at a corporate email was gone. She'd been replaced by someone who understood her worth, written not in ink, but in calm defiance. That night, as the city lights blinked like stars below my window, I whispered to myself, I didn't start a war. I started a conversation. And sometimes, that's all it takes. The morning the board meeting was scheduled, I woke up before sunrise. The city still slept, New York in its rare, quiet hour, and for the first time in months, I felt peace. Not triumph, not bitterness. Just stillness. The world has a strange way of balancing itself when you stop forcing outcomes. I poured coffee into my chipped blue mug, the one that had survived 7 years of late nights at Harrison and Cole, and looked out over the skyline. Today, the company that once dismissed me as replaceable would read my name aloud, not as an employee, but as a clause, a consequence, a warning. At 9:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from Clara, the HR manager. 3 words. They found it. I smiled softly. No anger, just inevitability. I imagined the scene as I'd written it in my head 100 times. The mahogany boardroom, table gleaming under recessed lights, the CEO seated at the head, coffee in hand, confidence painted across his face. The legal counsel, a man named Paul Latham, flipping through a thick binder of contracts, unaware that the next few lines would change the tone of the room. When he began to read aloud Section 47, I pictured it perfectly. The words echoing in that cold corporate chamber. In the event of unjust or retaliatory termination, all contractual benefits, stock options, and severance owed shall be accelerated and paid in full, with interest. Further, should the terminated employee have achieved more than 5 consecutive years of service with no disciplinary record, they shall be entitled to a full internal audit of the termination process to be reviewed by the board of directors and external legal counsel. A pause. A slow, dawning silence. Then the sound of a coffee cup slipping, hitting the table, spilling. I wasn't there, but I could feel it. The tremor in that room. The realization spreading like a ripple through water. The internal audit clause wasn't meant to be read aloud. It wasn't standard policy. It was an old protection written during the company's founding years, meant for senior executives, not analysts like me. But when I'd been promoted to strategic operations advisor, I'd insisted that my contract be aligned with legacy leadership terms. The HR lead at the time had agreed without noticing what that included. Now, that oversight was costing them everything. I pictured Paul's voice flattening as he read the last line. Failure to comply within 10 business days shall result in automatic arbitration, with all legal fees borne by the employer. It was a beautifully crafted time bomb, and it had just gone off. Within an hour, the board's group chat lit up. Directors demanding explanations. Lawyers calling emergency sessions. The CEO's assistant sending panicked messages about public disclosure risks. And me? I was sitting in a cafe downtown, stirring sugar into my coffee, watching the morning sunlight streak across the floor. When my phone rang, I already knew who it was. Unknown number. But I could almost hear his voice before he spoke. Grace, that's Martin. Can we talk? Martin, the CEO who'd once told me, loyalty doesn't mean saying no. Now his voice was tight, careful, almost deferential. We're reviewing the contract, and it appears there was some misunderstanding. Of course, we'll be reinstating your severance. Plus, the board would like to. No, I interrupted softly. You'll follow the clause. Fully. Silence. Then a low exhale. Grace, be reasonable. You don't want to make enemies here. I smiled faintly. I'm not making enemies, Martin. I'm reminding them I existed. And then I hung up. That night, the financial press got wind of it. A small headline at first. Senior analyst's exit clause triggers internal audit at Harrison and Cole. But by morning, it had spread. Whispers of wrongful termination, internal mismanagement, and unethical culture. The stock dipped. Shareholders demanded answers. The board, desperate to control the damage, released a statement praising my professionalism and grace, irony at its peak. And just like that, the company that silenced me became a lesson in every HR seminar across the city. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because I read and remembered. Because sometimes the sharpest weapon in a woman's hand isn't rage, it's patience. A month later, I stood on the edge of a cliff in Bar Harbor, Maine, the Atlantic stretching endlessly before me. The air smelled like salt and pine. My mother's laughter carried through the wind as she unpacked sandwiches from a wicker basket. I had imagined this trip for years, not as an escape, but as a promise to myself, a small corner of peace that no corporation could claim. Behind me, my phone buzzed once. A message from Clara. Audit completed. The board voted to settle. You'll receive full payment plus damages. They also revised the company policy. Employees can now take protected vacations without penalty. Congratulations, Grace. You did this. I stared at the screen for a long time before slipping the phone back into my bag. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to reply. The victory didn't need words. The world didn't know the details. They didn't know how many late nights I'd stayed behind, rewriting reports, mentoring interns, holding everything together while others claimed credit. They didn't know how I'd swallowed my pride the day they fired me, how that single line, "Thank you for the update," had taken every ounce of restraint I had. But the silence had been worth it. Because silence, when chosen, isn't weakness. It's precision. As I watched the waves crash against the rocks, I thought about power. How often it hides behind glass offices and corner views, convincing itself that control is the same as strength. But true power? It's knowing you don't need to shout to be heard. I'd spent years being the good employee, the one who said yes, who stayed late, who played nice. And they mistook that grace for compliance. They thought I'd fold quietly when pushed too far. What they didn't realize was that quiet people aren't harmless. We're observant. We see the cracks before the storm. We learn the system before we're tested by it. And when the moment comes, we don't fight loudly. We simply let the truth speak. The settlement money arrived 2 weeks later, more than I'd ever earned in a year. I donated a portion to a women's legal collective that helps wrongfully terminated employees. The rest I used to open a small consulting firm. My first client? A tech startup with a brilliant young founder, a woman who wanted to build a workplace where vacation wasn't a dirty word. I helped her design her HR policies from scratch, embedding fairness, protection, and transparency in every line. Sometimes I think about Harrison and Cole. I imagine the CEO in another board meeting, flanked by nervous lawyers, still haunted by the clause that carried my name. Maybe he even remembers my parting words, calm, polite, final. Thank you for the update. And maybe now he understands what I really meant. That gratitude wasn't surrender. It was warning. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's freedom. The freedom to walk away quietly while the walls they built around their power begin to crumble. My story isn't about winning against a company. It's about remembering my worth when someone tried to erase it. It's about the quiet confidence that comes from knowing the rules and using them without losing your soul. So if you've ever been told to be grateful, stay silent, or just accept it, remember this. You can stand tall without raising your voice. You can walk away with peace and power. And sometimes, the calmest goodbye echoes the loudest. Grace didn't need to burn bridges. She simply built her own path. Because true revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming your dignity, your voice, and your rest.